To hand you over to Heather so she can introduce herself, and we look forward to receiving your questions at the end of the session. So just bear with me a minute while I just hand over to Heather.
Hello everyone, my name is Heather Montoute. You may have read the background on me, but just to give you a brief overview. My background is in sales and business development. I used to be the global head of business development and client relationship management. So negotiation was always a huge part of my career. And I understand this evening that we're going to be talking particularly around salary negotiation. But just so that everyone who's listening gets something out of it, I'll use other examples as well, because actually the negotiation process, as it were, is applicable throughout or everything in life that you're actually going to negotiate on, whether it's buying a house, whether you are a buyer in a corporate or a seller, or whether in fact you want to confront your boss and actually get a better salary, and maybe take a holiday to St. Lucia or somewhere significantly more sunny than here. But anyway, so as we go through, I'm going to be talking about what I consider to be the art of negotiation. But as I said, it is also a process. And you never guess, Fiona, but I can't actually put the slides on. Can't control my slides.
Okay, don't worry, I will take over for you. It always happens at the beginning for some reason. Just bear with me a second and I'll just take that back, and then if you just obviously let me know when you want me to move on, that'd be great.
Okay, so yeah, if we could move on right now.
Yeah, just bear me a sec. There you go.
That's perfect, thank you.
Okay.
So as we go through here, I think the key things around negotiation are firstly always to remain calm. I think that the more nervous or agitated that we can appear would actually be always to our disadvantage. I think the other thing to always keep in mind throughout any negotiation is that anything is possible provided it works for all parties. And I think if that's the kind of sort of opening gambit, as it were, going into the negotiation, let's think about the outcome that we're trying to achieve and focus on that and think to ourselves, anything is possible here, provided it's going to work for all of us. And then, when things happen and people make suggestions, you can then say, well, yeah, but as we discussed, it has to work for all of us. And that particular thing doesn't work for me, and these are the reasons why. And let's see how we can get around that. And that's the kind of mindset that we actually need to have when we're going into a negotiation. On this first slide that Fiona has kindly put up for us, I've listed what I consider to be the 6 critical issues for negotiation. And the first one is timing. And that might appear quite obvious, but I find generally that the more a person is in a hurry to close a deal, then the more of a disadvantage they find themselves in when they're trying to negotiate. And I mean, of course, when you're looking to buy a house, the time, if you're in a position where you can wait and, it doesn't matter, you're not in any hurry, then you can tend to actually negotiate a better price for that house. And equally, anyone who's in a rush to move would probably be prepared to drop the price. That sounds quite obvious. I think when we're going to negotiate a salary, we do need to consider the timing, particularly the phase that the company and the organisation is going through. For example, if they are making redundancies, if they've announced a drop in profits or issued a profits warning, that might not be the very best time to start thinking about, oh, well, maybe I need a salary increase, even if you believe quite genuinely that you deserve one. And also, don't leave it until you deserve one. I think you should always start planning reasonably well in advance and start to lay the seeds for the end negotiation discussion. And then, choose a time when, you have done something particularly well, when you have just received some particular praise, when you have just been given feedback around, we're really, really pleased about that, and et cetera, or where you may have brought in a big deal or something like that. And then, of course, there's the trivial timing. Let's understand what is the best time of day to go and discuss this, depending on whether your boss happens to be a morning person, for example, or not. What particular phase is your boss going through right now? Would this be a good time for an approach or not? How much does he need you right now? So those are the sort of things I'm thinking about around timing. The other things on there I'm going to cover in more detail later, but particularly, position versus interest. What I mean by that is that people can often say things, but that's not exactly what they mean. We'll look at the negotiation styles so that you can get an understanding of what you might expect and how people may behave if they have a particular negotiating style. We'll look at how to analyze and think about the power dynamics that are going on in a negotiation, and really how to avoid deadlock, because once you're in deadlock and you're both standing your ground, then basically the person who needs the deal most will be the most disadvantaged, because they will be the one that has to break the deadlock. And one of the key ways to avoid getting into deadlock, I find, is always to keep in mind what I said at the outset, which is anything can work here. Let's be very flexible. Let's be creative. We just need to find a solution that's going to work for all of us. And having that at the front of our minds all the time, rather than drawing lines in the sand from which we cannot retreat, unless we are absolutely categorically committed to it. We don't want to draw a line in the sand that we can't move away from if we would wish to move away from it, if that makes sense. And then we're going to look at things, objectives and outcomes, and a win-win solution. And what I mean by that is that everybody has to feel that they have negotiated the very best deal that they can. If one party feels that they have been disadvantaged, that might be okay if you're dealing with a one-off transaction and you're never ever going to have to deal with them again. But if they feel that, you're in a relationship and they feel that they've been shortchanged or ripped off, then you can guarantee that sooner or later throughout that relationship, they will get you back. And that's not a good position to be in. Everyone needs to walk away from the table feeling that, I've got the very best deal that I could have in the circumstances, and therefore we found a solution that worked for all of us. And that, for me, during my career, was the difference between, one-off transaction type of business and relationship business. And I think particularly when you're negotiating salary, you don't want your boss to feel that, he's paying more than he feels that you're worth. Because, of course, at some stage, he will be in a position whereby he's got to choose who needs to leave the organization. Okay, so he always needs to feel that he's paying you what you're worth, but he doesn't want to be in a position where he feels he's paying you more than you're worth. Okay, so on the next slide, when we look at the skills that were required for negotiation, the first one is listening, and I've put this at the top because the more you listen, the better you will negotiate. You might think that the more you talk, the better you negotiate, but that is absolutely untrue. The more you listen, the more you understand the other person's point of view, the more you get a sense of what's really important to them, and the more that you can then play back to them and say, well, look, if this is really important to you, let's put this on the table. And if that's really important. And so you get a sense of what they value. So, for example, if someone's coming to buy your house, understanding what would be of value to them enables you to say, well, of course, as you said, this is what you're looking for, and this is what the house has. It kind of plays back, and they think, yeah, actually, that is what I'm looking for, and that is what I want, and it makes negotiation of price much easier, because you're saying, this is what you told me you're looking for, and yes, look, this is what you've got. And again, when we're looking at salary, the more you listen to your boss, the more you listen to what are the qualities that he's looking for, what qualities does he value, what is it that you bring, and the more questions, which is actually the next point on this slide, the more questions that you can ask, rather than making statements, the better position that you're going to be in. And again, that might seem a little odd, because a lot of people think, right, we're going to negotiate, let's state our position. Well, I don't agree with that. I think that the more you ask, the more you say, okay, right, well, let's just try and understand what's really important here. Let's try and understand what we're trying to achieve. Let's, and listen to what the other person says. These, for me, are the top two qualities required for negotiation, because when you ask questions and understand the other person's position, you can then understand how much really do they want to get the deal done, and you can play it back in their own language. The third point on this slide is about concentration, and you really do need the concentration in order to listen. Sometimes we're so focused on what we're trying to get out of the negotiation that we can often switch off. We can be thinking of something else. We can be thinking of maybe the next question that we're going to ask. But we must remember that you've got to be really in the moment and concentrating on what people are saying. And then we get to the next point, clarity and speed of thought. Again, if whilst we're developing our techniques for negotiation, we should always take time, and don't think that in the beginning that you actually have to respond. It's perfectly okay, even in some of the heated negotiations I've been in, where we've been hammering out the nuts and bolts for some huge, great deals. It's okay to say, yeah, okay, let me think about that for a moment. That's an interesting point that you make. Yeah, I need a couple of moments to think about that, and how that might impact me and my firm. And yeah, so in the meantime, we can talk about this, but I'm just going to reflect on that for a moment, and that's perfectly okay. And in fact, in some cases, it kind of puts them off their guard. That, oh, okay. And it's much, much better than just responding with something and then regretting it afterwards. So do take a moment to think about what it is that you're going to respond back with. Again, we're always trying to avoid deadlock. And if you need time and you want to talk, you can always say, yeah, that's a very, very interesting point. As I said, the whole objective here is to find a way of gaining agreement and something that's going to work for all of us that are sat around this table. And that, as you're talking like that, that's giving you time to think about what they've just said before you then need to respond. Okay, then the next point, summarizing, very, very important. Take time at each point, to summarize, particularly summarizing what you've agreed. Because, if you don't, you get a few points down in the negotiation, and then they say, no, I never agreed that, and you're back where you started. So, if there's a number of points to agree, it's very, very useful at each stage to actually say, right, okay, so that's what we've just discussed here. Are we all agreed on that? Yeah, that's great. So let's park that. Now let's think about the next point. And then moving on, don't be afraid to challenge. And I don't mean challenge in an aggressive way at all, but to challenge and say, well, actually, how can you think that might work on our part? We've talked about what we're trying to achieve. What you've just suggested couldn't possibly work for these reasons. Or again, always keeping your tone polite and courteous, and always being questioning, not confrontational, but actually challenging what they say. And okay, so where's that coming from, and what's driving that, and or what's made you put that on the table? Okay, and then the last couple of things we've got setting objectives. As I said, very much a skill. Let's understand what it is exactly that we're trying to agree here. Gaining agreement is the next point. And let's not forget that a lot of this is about acting. And, you may be churning up inside. I do remember going into my first negotiation being absolutely terrified. But you can't allow them to see that. You actually have to be very much in control of your body language, very much like poker players, whereby, you have to appear to be very, very open. No matter what your position is, you're very, very open, you're very calm, you're very relaxed, nothing's going to faze you. And particularly, even in the later stages, even now if I've got to go into a really heavy negotiation, then it's still scary. But nobody on the other side of the table would read that from me. They'd always think that, this is something I do all the time. I'm very relaxed about it. I'm not in any particular hurry. I'm open to discussion, but I'm not, they're not going to win easily. They're going to have a tough time getting what they want. But we are going to be working towards an outcome. So that's very important. All right. Now, when we move on we talked about, negotiation is an art, but there also is a process. And what I've listed on the next slide under theory and process is negotiation is the process which occurs when two parties have an equal need to agree. That's true negotiation. As I put in my next point, that the power dynamics will need to be approximately equal, because where one party has a greater need for agreement than the other, then this will always affect the dynamics between the two parties. And the one that needs the deal the most is obviously going to be the one who's at the most disadvantage. So the question is, can you act well enough to not to appear as though you need the deal more than the other party? Okay, and then the final point, that each party may not reveal their true motivations, and that is about acting. And that comes back to one of the key skills that I was talking about, which is around questioning. Because, we question in order to challenge a statement. If you think about a court of law and you get a barrister and they are questioning a witness, the more they question the witness, the more the witness will trip themselves up. That's the idea. Because what most of us do is we prepare a statement to give, or, a position to give, but the more that we're questioned on it, the more it's apparent that that's not really the true position. And that's why listening to what's said, looking for anomalies, and keeping on questioning, that's why they're the top two skills required to actually go through it. Now, on the next slide, what I've talked about here is the phases of negotiation. And the mistake that the vast majority of people go into is to leap straight into the bargaining phase. They think, oh, right, I need a salary increase. Let's get in front of my boss and let's start bargaining. I'll tell him, what I want, and etc. And you do that at your peril. Preparation is the key. And it will absolutely, prepare you for success. So when we look at the next slide, why do we need preparation? Well, not only will it give you this confidence, but also when the more you know about the other person, the more you know about the deal, the more that you've done your research, then the more confident you'll be and the better the outcome. I mean, if you were going in to negotiate your salary, you really do need to research. And what I mean is, how much do you know about what other people within the organization get paid in relation to what it is that they deliver to the organization? Have you benchmarked yourself externally and as well? So, if you were to call a couple of headhunters and to talk to them about, well, this is kind of the role that I might be looking for, what kind of salary would that actually, attach itself to? Get some external advice. Find out what your role would be worth in another company. It's much more difficult sometimes to find out internally, unless, of course, you have grade bands and salary bands. But, for example, you can find out what, if you do that, then, of course, you know what your limitations are and you know that you're within a range. But then you can find out what a similar grade and band is in another organization. It just gives you just a little bit of knowledge and confidence that what you're asking for isn't out of the ordinary. But also, if they had to replace you, well, you would need to find out, well, what would be the cost of that? I mean, a senior position can cost, I don't know, anything up to £30,000 perhaps to replace someone by the time they've appointed a recruitment agency and paid their commission, etc., etc., and all of the time to interview and to appoint and then wait for the person to come into the role. These things need to be taken into account because, of course, would they rather pay you a little bit more rather than go through the hassle of trying to recruit outside? And then if you know that they'd have to pay a larger salary to someone coming in, then again, that gives you confidence when you're actually going into, going in front of your boss. Well, I know for a fact that if I were to leave and you replace me, I know that this is the kind of salary that you'd have to be paying. And the only reason you're not paying it is because I'm the incumbent and I've been doing the role for this amount of time. So know your worth, I think, is where I'm coming from. What is it that you really genuinely deliver to the organisation? So what's their return on investment, if that's the way that you want to look at it? What do you bring, and what do they have to pay for it, and what's the alternative? If you weren't doing this role and someone else did, what would it actually cost them? Okay, so when we're preparing to negotiate, we could, for example, think about buying a house. And the reason I used buying a house as an example is because I wanted to talk about analysing the components of the offer, which is actually as we go through the next slide. Because in any offer, some things will be fixed and unmovable, and some may be variable. I mean, in a house, you can't really change the location. There might be strict restrictions on whether or not you can extend. There might be restrictions on what you can actually do to the outside of the house. These are things that you can't change, and if your buyer doesn't like them, then they can't be changed, and you're not going to get around it. Alternatively, there could be a lot of stuff that is variable, and so do you want some of the contents? Curtains are always variable, particularly if the windows are odd-shaped. So when you're negotiating your salary, understand what's fixed. What can, I guess, flexibility does your boss have? If you are in a graded salary band, then you know what the maximum is. And you know that actually to go outside of that, what's the procedure? What would need to happen? And how then could you motivate him to do it? Also, your boss may only have, a sort of fixed, how can I put it, sanctioning authority, whereby he can only do this amount and then it needs to go up. And it's obviously much easier to get smaller increments with your immediate boss than it is to go for a larger increment if it's got to go up the line, because clearly that would be much more difficult. So I think when you're again in your preparation phase, understanding what would be absolutely fixed and what could be changed. But if you actually look at your own role, you might be saying, well, this is what I'm looking for in terms of salary increase, and you might be saying, but in return for that, I might be prepared to do this, or I might be prepared to take on this responsibility, or we're always struggling over here, and I'm prepared to take that on if you'll be prepared to consider, looking at my salary. Because it might just be an extra responsibility or an extra task, or the extra management of one person. So think about not always straight salary increase, but what is it that you could give in return that might justify or give a reason or a value against what it is that that you can offer back to the organisation. Okay, so moving on, when you realise what's actually fixed and what's actually variable, you can start to plot them on this scale, because once we actually fill in the boxes here, what we'll be able to see is that as you look down to the right, you think, oh, these will be the cost to the seller, and in the high range is the value to the buyer. Now, that still applies to salary, because what is of value to your boss? What is it that he really values about you? What is it that you bring to the organisation that maybe is unique? That would be fab, because if it's unique, then you can ask for lots more money. Hopefully, you ask for a lot in the first place. But obviously, everything that is every time you're talking about money, that's a high cost to them. But there's a lot of things in between. Where do you think that you could sit? So what would be worth? What would be worth the higher price? I think is where I'm going. And if we refer back to the house situation, let's say, for example, you have a house that you're selling, and you do have very different kinds of windows that are non-standard. Now, we all know how much curtains cost. Now, if you're going to move out of that house, though, you can't really take them with you, because they're not going to fit to the house that you're going to. So it's a very low value to you. But to someone coming in, that's a really high value to them, because for them to actually have to replace all of those at non-standard windows is going to cost them a fortune. Okay, so that's and if they don't buy them, as far as you're concerned, you're just going to put them in the skip. So, but they may not know that, and therefore they may be prepared to pay quite a high price for them. I'm hoping that's making sense. But as I said, I think in terms of salary negotiation, it's really thinking about what is it about you that your boss particularly values, and then coming into I wouldn't be asking for a salary increase, and before I started asking questions over a reasonable period of time, which is when he praised me, oh, okay, so all right, give me some feedback. All right, okay, I really like that. Oh, and that's important to you, yeah. And getting an understanding of what it is that I deliver that he really values, so that I know what to play back on when I'm trying to ask him and say, well, look, this is what you're telling me you think of me. This is what you're telling me about how much you value me. This is what you're telling me how much you value what I bring to the organisation, and this is how much you value my skills. And as a result of that, this is the sort of increase that I'd be looking for, on that basis. So anyway, that's the preparation phase. Then moving on to the discussion phase, and then we start to look at the position and interest, which is what I call the iceberg, because what people say on the surface is only the tip of the iceberg. The vast majority of their real position, their real interest, lies underneath. And this is what I was talking about earlier on when I just sort of alluded to it. This is all about questioning. This is all about trying to learn and to understand the other person's position and to understand why they're taking that position. And that's what you get through questioning. So that's an interesting standpoint. What's driving that? What would be the consequences if we didn't reach that? How would that affect you? What would be the impact of us not getting a deal on that? How would that affect you going forward? And again, when we're coming to negotiating salary, understanding what the impact is on the organisation of you being unhappy. How does that affect you doing your role? That might be a consequence. What would be the impact if you left, as I talked about? How much would it cost them to replace you? How difficult would that be? You're in obviously a much more disadvantageous position if you're doing a role that there's a whole host of people out there could do. But particularly if you're doing a job where there's a lot of training involved, at the outset of the role, because that's a huge investment from a company point of view. And they don't necessarily want to have to go through that again. Never mind the recruitment costs, the implementation cost of someone coming in, then the cost of training them, then the fact that they're not fully functional, they're not actually really earning their salary for whatever period of time. These are all things to understand and really get underneath the iceberg and actually find out what's driving the other person's position. Okay. Then we're ready to go into the discussion phase and to start the questions. And always use open questions. What is it that you value? What is it that you're looking for? What do you consider my worth to be? All of these kind of things, and just to try and get the other person to speak as much as possible. And then when they speak, listen to the answers, and don't interrupt. Make sure that you always hear them out, which is my third point. You've really got to be on your, really in the room all the time. And the more that they think they're being heard, the more comfortable they will feel. And we want them to feel comfortable. We want them to think that they are able to make their points. When we're interrupted, we get agitated and irritated, and that's just not where we want them to be. So beware of closed questions, because you don't really want to get yes or no unless you're at the end. Do we have agreement on that then? Yes, good. Or no, you actually want a yes or no. But right up until the end, you don't want to be asking closed questions. You want to be asking open questions that get them to discuss, that allow you to understand where it is that they're coming from. And, dropping some surprise questions, things that they perhaps weren't expecting, just like off the cuff. And, and don't, what do I mean by weakening questions? I just think, trying to, I guess what I'm trying to do is, when I say, what I mean by strong questions is, start with an establishing question that actually sort of establishes the whole position of the negotiation. And then what we're trying to do is lead them down to a yes or no answer. So I ask a really open question at the outset, tell me what your position is. And I let them talk for ages and ages. And then I pick up on, well, the things that I might agree with. And that way you can then say, okay, so if I were to say, you say this is what's important, I'm saying I agree with that, so we can tick those off. And overall, what we're trying to do on the questioning is trying to establish the other party's shopping list. Try to establish what they are trying to seek out of the negotiation, because that way you can respond, and it's much better to respond and then say, right, okay, from what you said, these are the points that we can agree on first off, and these are the points that require further discussion. Not this is absolutely no, but these are the points that require further discussion, because of course anything is possible provided it's going to work for both of us. And actually, at this point in time, these points are not working for us or for me. Okay, on the next part of the discussion phase is listening. We've talked about this quite a lot, so I'm not going to go over that too much. But I think always appearing as though you're listening, always being in the moment, definitely take notes. Definitely, that you can then refer back to them. Well, I thought you said this. No, I didn't say that. Well, actually, I did write that down at the time, and this is what you said. It's really quite powerful. But concentrate on the words and the usage. And then also, on the next slide, you want to be picking up on the non-verbal signals. Are they starting to shift? It just signals a change in behaviour, which is always worth noting. And then you can start to ask a follow-up question. And we're listening for ambiguous words. And just suspend judgment and just check your understanding, which is, so what I'm hearing is, and is that what you mean? And so what you mean by that is this, don't make assumptions around their answers, but actually check that you've understood correctly. So what kind of style, negotiation style, are you likely to come across? Well, there's 4 main styles, as you can see here. Some are much more open than others, and some are much more cooperative than others. If you look at the gun dog, they are generally open and straightforward. They'll give something for nothing. They're resilient, patient, and take the long view. They listen well. They're very courteous, and they prefer to cooperate and they accept confrontation, but they much prefer to cooperate. And they're disciplined, and they will look for a win-win. And they'll be quite obvious, people who are coming to the table, yeah, we want to get the discussion going, we want to get a good outcome. And when you question them, they're very open, and they answer your questions. Another open style is the lion, but he's the opposite. He's very strong, overtly aggressive, so you'll spot him a mile off. Sees negotiation as a one-off, so therefore isn't interested in how you might feel about it, because he's just going to win by domination in order to get something for nothing. And his view will be, well, your gain is my loss. When you come across that style, you know that it's not going to matter a jot about the long-term relationship. It will all be about this one particular deal. And, so appealing to his sort of, well, in the longer-term relationship, etc., isn't going to really wash with him. He's just going to want to know, what are we going to do during this one battle? Then on the hidden side, you've got your sheep, and the sheep is very passive by nature, very uncomfortable, would give something for nothing unconditionally. Looks long-term, but really avoids confrontation, but, would probably be seen as a pushover. Yeah, we always hope that one of those is going to be on the other side of the table when I go into negotiation. But also, you could get the shark, and the shark is what I would call covertly aggressive. So unlike the lion who comes storming in and is openly aggressive, the shark just can't resist the temptation to appear to cooperate and then just come in and basically bite your leg off, and would be happy to win by deception. In fact, that would be their aim, probably. They really want something for nothing. So hopefully that's kind of giving you a flavour of the type of negotiation styles. And, of course, sometimes, when you know what you're dealing with, which becomes reasonably obvious, and the more you go in, because I wouldn't ever suggest that you change the way in which you open, which is to let them talk, and then you get an understanding of their style, and also of whether they're in this for the long term or not. And of course, if they're not, then you might as well just go for what you can get, because it's not going to make any difference to them whether or not you actually come back and renegotiate in 3 months or 6 months' time. So my tips in the bargaining phase would always be around don't concede anything without getting anything in the return. Even if you're giving away something that is of minimal value to you, it's always good to, right, okay, well, if you want that, then fine, and I'll give this. And it's nothing's agreed until everything's agreed, so that, you're not giving away your crown jewels before you know what you're getting in return. And the if-then technique, as I call it, as well. So if we could agree that you could give us that, then we will do this. Or if we were to do that, then what we would want in return is this. You have to have confidence, whether you're confident inside or not. You need to convince yourself that your need to do the deal is less than the other party, and make it appear so by your demeanour, because the more that you signal that you're desperate for the deal, then the worse position you're going to put yourself in. And I think that particularly when you're negotiating salary, because we're just actually following a pattern of, these are the things that you said that you valued. This is what I've been given to the company over the last whatever, ever since you last had a salary. This is the sort of salary range that I could command elsewhere, and that you would have to pay if I were to leave, plus the recruitment fees. Even if it's not a specific recruitment firm, there's still a cost of recruiting, advertising, searching through the job applications, interviewing, etc., etc. So the next slide is about deadlock, which is something that we really do want to avoid, because it really is the enemy of successful negotiation, and you don't really want to get yourself in that position. So your response is, as I said, unless you're absolutely categoric that that you're only going this far, and that is it. So, for example, if you're buying a house and you are absolutely categoric, you're only going to buy it if this happens, or you're only going to buy it at this price and no higher, then no matter what happens, you're just not prepared to move, because once you draw a line in the sand, then you can't move away from it, and as a result, you're then in this very, very difficult position. If you still, if you tell them that your absolute rock bottom price is, 90,000, but you're really prepared to pay 100, there's just no way you can do it credibly. So the way to always avoid it is, well, of course, everything is possible, provided it works for both of us. At the moment, that's not working for me. I probably need to go away and think about what might work for me around that, etc., etc. But in any deadlock, the party that needs to win the deal the least is the one likely to win, and they will have to take the initiative because there's no other choice. And if you feel that you're absolutely headed for deadlock, then you need to change something in the tone of the negotiation, which is normally, all right, well, this might be an opportune time to take a break. We probably need to reflect on where we are right now. Let's just summarize that. And then let's take a moment to reflect on where we need to go from here. Okay. So finally, once you've done that, we get into the agreement phase. And the agreement phase is all about summarizing. And the key rule is always check that both parties have the same understanding. Then actually document it. Again, even when you've summarized it, if you walk away from the meeting, you always email it. If it's, obviously if it's a contract, you document it. But as soon as you've actually agreed it, close it, and then don't stay any longer than necessary. That's true in business. A big legal contract, you sign it and you leave, and you don't celebrate until you're well out of the vicinity of, you don't want to let them see you. I was in a situation once where a couple of people in my team had gone and they'd signed this very good deal, and then they got in the lift and they were going, oh, yes, ka-ching. And the customer saw them, and we never had the same relationship again because he genuinely thought that he'd been ripped off. So the final point there is, once agreement's reached, don't stay any longer. Move away because, always quit whilst you're ahead. So finally, in summary then, negotiating salary is all about researching, benchmarking your worth externally and internally where possible. If you've got someone that's prepared to share that, or if you've got a conversation with HR is always a good thing, so that when you go into the negotiation, you do know what your worth is. Understand the impact that you make on the business and the impact of you not being there, so that you understand your value. Follow the 4 stages. Don't just go straight in. Make sure that you do all of your prep. Make sure that you do all of the discussion before you start bargaining. And, of course, the final point, stay calm. That's the most important thing. Okay, so we've got a few minutes to get some questions. I haven't seen any coming up during the presentation, but if you'd like to ask any questions now, I'm sure Fiona would be happy to take them for you.
Yep, great. While those are coming through, I'll just let you know about the Career Farm's next webinar session that's coming up in August, excuse me, which is a session on the changing hiring market by Tony Restall. I've seen this session before by Tony, and it's definitely one to watch. He's very engaging, and he's very knowledgeable regarding social media and how businesses now use social media to recruit. So that's actually on the 6th of August. It's actually a lunchtime session this time. So if you're interested in that, obviously get in touch with Janet. Janet, if you're there, I don't know if you've got any other sessions coming up in between that you'd like to let everybody know about, just while we're waiting for questions.
Hello, Fiona. Yes, we have. We've got a quite interesting one coming up in July on coaching, so please do sign up for that. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact date, which is embarrassing. So, but I will be putting out some info about that. That's okay. Actually, I have got a question for Heather, and it's because I obviously working in the OU, we are very much a company that has very set grades and salary bands, and I couldn't go into my boss and negotiate a raise, but I think I might be able to go in and perhaps say, look, I'm working at a certain level, do you agree I should have my level changed? Is that something that she would agree with, perhaps?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, that would, and you would follow a very, very similar process, Janet, which is, you know, do all your research, and that is to understand what it actually takes, what it is that, you know, what's the job description for the next level. You know, what is it that, you know, because there would be competencies, presumably, that you would need to achieve in order to get to the next level. And then, you know, when you're, so that's all the preparation, finding out, you know, what would be considered the next level. So that's when, you know, you go into all the questioning, saying to your boss, well, what is it that you would need to see from me in order for you to agree this?
Yeah, that sounds sensible. And actually, we do advertise jobs online with various grades, so you could even look at the grades above what you're working at now and perhaps see what the competencies are and maybe work it out from there.
Completely. And then, you know, but, you know, rather than just going in and saying that's what you want, I would go in and get some feedback around, you know, you know, if I knew what the competence was. So what are your views about my competency in relation to?
Thank you, Heather. That was brilliant.
What are your views about my competency in relation to another thing? All right, well, that's interesting. And then I might leave it there, and then I might go back at another stage and say, well, you know, I was thinking, what do you think about? And you kind of build it up. And then when you go in, you say, look, you know, I've been reflecting on this, and it would appear that I'm actually performing at this level. And, you know, and you've confirmed this because you told me that you've noticed this about me and noticed that about me. So I'm wondering if we can have a discussion about the next grade. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you very much indeed, Heather.
You're really welcome.
Heather, we've got some other questions. I don't know whether you can see them, but I will read them out. We've got one from, now I'm not sure if this is from Lisa or John. It may be John who's sitting with Lisa. But they've asked, how can you obtain your benchmark when moving from the public sector to the private sector?
That's a good idea. I think you could only obtain a benchmark, I think, because you can, if you actually, your benchmark will be on your skills and your competences. So what, you know, you could go to a recruitment agency and say, you know, what value in the private sector, you know, do these skills and competencies have? Because, you know, if you were to look at, well, you know, what is it that I'm really, really good at? What is it that, you know, the competencies about which I'm valued? And then what kind of, you could speak to a recruitment agency and say, what kind of role would actually require these skills at this level? And therefore, what kind of salary would be attached? Because, you know, it's not the exact role, but there will be a lot of skills and competencies within your job description that could be matched to a job outside that requires those same level of skills. Does that make sense?
Okay, hopefully that helps, Lisa or John. Moving on, we've got a question from Catherine. Catherine's asking, should it ever come to threatening to resign when other discussions have failed? And then should you stay if an offer is then made after you threaten to resign?
I don't really like the idea of threatening to resign. And I'll tell you why, because I don't want them to be in a position whereby they feel coerced, as it were. I think you can only threaten to resign if you genuinely would, because you're always in danger of them calling your bluff. I would be much happier to actually see if I could find a role elsewhere, and then say, well, look, you know, I actually have been, you know, I have been offered a job elsewhere. I mean, because I have done that in the past, where I've actually found a role, and then said, well, look, you know, I have found this role. I don't particularly want to leave you. The reason why I'm leaving you is, you know, I mean, I absolutely enjoy the role, and that's why I've gone for a very similar role that actually plays to my skill set, as does this one. You know, the difference being that this one, you know, is valuing my skills much higher. but I would be very happy to stay. I think, threatening to resign is fine as long as you're prepared to carry it through. And if you're prepared to carry it through, and then they go, oh, well, okay, well, if you were going to leave, well, then, yeah, you do stay. Hopefully it doesn't get to that stage, though. It is keeping it in very much the discussion phase and understanding, and then, right, so what is it that I need to do in order for you to agree this? I mean, I'd ask the question, are you telling me I have to actually go out and find another job first and then, rather than what it sounds like is, if I don't get this, I will resign, but much more around, well, please tell me what it is that I need to do before, you're going to recognise the worth here. Are you telling me I need to find another job, and then perhaps you'll give it to me?
Okay, hopefully, Catherine, that answered your question. We've just got one last one from Andrew. Andrew, this is particularly for you, Heather. Andrew's asked, have you ever been in a negotiation that's gone seriously wrong, and how did you recover from it?
Yeah, yes, I have. I mean, you can't have a career of negotiation and always be successful. Of course, I've had one that's gone horrendously wrong. And recover from it, I didn't actually. I just called it and said, you know what, this has happened, and it's gone entirely wrong. I'm holding my hands up here. I think we need to draw a line here, and at some stage, we need to come back to the table and start again. And that I thought was the only credible thing to do, which was to actually call it out, admit it, and say to the other side, right, okay, we need to time out and regroup.
Okay, hopefully that helped, Andrew. Okay, that's it for now. Just to go back to Valerie asked a question earlier regarding whether she gets a copy of the slides. They will be available from our website tomorrow. The login details are on your screen now. You can also gain access. The Open University have paid for you to have